Have you ever wondered why some hotel rooms skip the number 616? Why certain doors are sealed with paint so thick, it cracks like old skin? What if I told you, there's a room so dangerous, it doesn't just trap the people who enter it rewrites them. Welcome back to EchoVerse Whispers, where forgotten stories echo through time, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to listen. This time, we're diving into a story so unsettling, so mind-twisting, that even speaking the number might pull you closer to its orbit. Why was room 616 built? Who keeps trying to enter it, despite all the warnings? And most terrifying of all, what happens when the door finally opens? You think you've heard every haunted room story by now. Good. That's what it wants you to believe. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and don't answer if it knocks 5 times. This is, room 616, was never meant to be opened. I don't usually question my team's story submissions, but this one, something feels off. The title alone, Room 616, was never meant to be opened, makes my skin crawl, and not in the usual clickbait way. The script showed up unannounced in the shared folder. No author credit, no notes. Just a file named do_not_upload.mp4. At first I thought it was a joke or a viral gimmick one of the interns cooked up for views, but the more I read it, the more I felt like I wasn't supposed to. I've run horror campaigns for years on this channel, but this one, it reads more like a confession than a story. And here's the part that truly unsettles me. There are surveillance screenshots embedded in the script that match a real hotel I've actually stayed in. Before I hit record, before I narrate this thing to the world, I need to ask, is this a script? A warning, or room 616, was never meant to be opened. I woke up gasping like I'd been underwater for hours. Throat raw, muscles aching. The sheets tangled around me like I'd been fighting something in my sleep, and the room looked exactly the same but colder now. As if the air itself had lost its memory of warmth. Yet, what unsettled me most, was that the mirror was now blank. Back to normal, no flicker, no false footage. Just a clear reflection of myself looking pale, shaken, and unwell. And when I stumbled into the bathroom to splash cold water on my face, I noticed two strange things. One, the sink faucet released a foul-smelling brown trickle instead of water. And two, there was a new mark on my neck, just beneath my left ear. A faint bruise in the shape of a thumbprint, as if someone had touched me while I slept. I tried again to use my phone but it remained dead, and the room phone still had no buttons, no dial tone. Just silence when I picked up the receiver. And the hallway outside was even more unnerving in daylight, if you could call the dim yellow spill from the ceiling fixtures daylight with all the other doors closed tightly, some sealed with rusted chains or duct tape, and the carpet seeming more threadbare now, like it had aged years overnight. I decided I'd had enough, and began walking back toward the lobby with the full intention of demanding a refund, or at least a ride to the nearest bus station. But when I reached the reception area, it was no longer empty. Instead, a man in a wrinkled suit stood behind the desk, staring blankly at the wall with a crooked grin that didn't falter even when I waved my hand in front of his face. And when I asked him for help, for a cab, for directions, he simply blinked slowly and said, "You checked in last night, and you haven't checked out yet." His tone gentle but final, like it was already decided, like leaving wasn't an option, and the door behind me wouldn't budge no matter how hard I pushed, as if welded shut from the outside. Panic rising in my throat, I ran to the elevator, slamming the call button over and over until the doors opened with a rusty sigh and I stepped inside. Heart pounding, but the only floor option that lit up when I pressed it was 6. The rest of the buttons unresponsive, worn down, or entirely missing. And the elevator shuddered violently as it ascended, pausing midway to flicker the overhead lights and emit a strange grinding sound like it was chewing through bone. When the doors opened, I found myself not in the hallway I had come from, but in an entirely different corridor, longer, darker, the wallpaper peeled back like skin, and the carpet beneath my feet was squishy, wet, reeking of something that made my eyes water. And as I walked slowly forward, I noticed that every door I passed was slightly ajar, each one revealing glimpses of movement inside figures hunched in corners, shadows writhing unnaturally against the floor, whispers in a language I couldn't place, and above it all, the sound of something singing softly from far down the hall, the same 3-note melody on repeat, warbling and off-key, like an old music box melting. When I finally reached what I thought might be a stairwell, the door bore no number, no knob, just a slit at eye level. And through it I could see my own reflection again, only it wasn't mirroring my actions, it was watching me, still as death. And slowly raising one hand to press against the glass, while I stood paralyzed. And then it mouthed something I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. Don't let it see you leave. The hallway behind me groaned, and I turned to find the silhouette of the concierge not behind the desk now, but floating down the corridor toward me, arms limp at his sides, feet inches off the ground. His face contorted into a smile too wide. Teeth far too many, eyes rolled upward like a doll's, and I ran. Sprinted toward the stairwell door and slammed my shoulder into it again and again, until something gave and I tumbled into darkness. Falling hard against concrete steps and sliding downward until I hit a landing. Scraped and bruised but alive, the air around me filled with the scent of mold and rot and something much worse, something ancient. Unclean, like the breath of a sealed tomb, and as I stood, I realized the stairwell didn't go up or down anymore. Just forward, a narrow passage lit by swinging bulbs that sparked with each sway, casting momentary shapes on the walls that didn't match mine. I walked because I had no other choice, the walls growing tighter, the ceiling lower, until I reached a door at the end marked 616 again, though it couldn't have been the same room, not this deep underground. And the moment I touched the handle, I heard a child's voice giggle from behind it, and the moment I touched the handle, I heard a child's voice giggle from behind it and whisper, "You're almost home," which made no sense at all but sent my skin crawling. I opened it slowly, heart hammering, to reveal a perfect replica of my childhood bedroom. Same posters, same toy chest, even the old nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, but everything was in grayscale, like the life had been drained from it, and on the bed sat a figure I hadn't seen in decades, my mother. Or a version of her, eyes hollow, hands folded neatly in her lap as she stared at me and said, "You're not supposed to remember this place." Not yet, before she stood and opened the closet door behind her, revealing once again the impossible. Darkness, and this time, without thinking, I moved toward it. A curse wrapped in narrative. I guess there's only one way to find out. Let's begin. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. The darkness behind the closet door didn't feel like a shadow or an absence of light, it was alive. Breathing, a heavy, intelligent void that seemed to throb with anticipation as I stepped closer, and The air around me shifted instantly, colder, heavier. So dense it felt like I was walking through a membrane, rather than across carpet. And as I crossed the threshold, something snapped behind my eyes, like a thread unraveling, and suddenly I wasn't in the grayscale version of my childhood room anymore, but in a long, circular hallway that spiraled downward endlessly, its walls pulsing like the inside of a throat, wet and veined and slick to the touch, with faint whispers rising from beneath my feet like steam. I couldn't go back, there was no door behind me, just a curved continuation of the corridor, and so I walked. Barefoot now, without realizing when I'd lost my shoes. The floor soft and warm like skin, the lights above me blinking in irregular patterns, casting flickers of my own shadow across the curved walls in dozens of warped iterations that didn't always move when I did. Sometimes they twitched independently, heads tilting, arms reaching. And once I saw one of them grin, when I didn't, but I kept going. Because something deep inside me had begun to whisper the same thing over and over again. You were always going to return here. The spiral eventually opened into a massive chamber, circular, ceilingless, with a soft blue glow rising from a shallow pool in the center. And surrounding the water were dozens, maybe hundreds of doors, each one marked 616, all identical, all sealed, all humming faintly as if waiting for something, and in the center of the pool, a woman stood ankle deep in the water, her back to me, humming a lullaby I hadn't heard in years, one my mother used to sing when I was sick. And though I couldn't see her face, I knew instinctively that she wore the same face I'd seen in the grayscale bedroom, the same hollow eyes and silent, knowing smile. When she finally turned to look at me, she spoke without moving her lips, the words echoing directly in my mind, "You opened the wrong room. And now it has to know you." And as she said that, the water around her rippled and rose, forming shapes. Bodhi's copies of me in various states of decay. One with no eyes, one with its jaw hanging by threads, one that looked burned from head to toe. And all of them began to move toward the edge of the pool, reaching out with blackened hands like they wanted to drag me in and replace me. I stumbled back, hitting one of the 616 doors behind me, and the second my palm touched it, the door swung inward and sucked me inside with a force that defied gravity, pulling me into a narrow corridor lined with monitors that all showed different versions of my life, me as a child crying in a hallway I didn't recognize. Me in college waking up screaming in a dorm I never lived in, me sleeping peacefully in dozens of unfamiliar beds, while a dark shape loomed in the corner of every room, and as I moved down the hall, the monitors began flickering violently, distorting into static, and I could hear something moving above the ceiling panels, skittering like enormous centipede legs made of bone and rusted metal, getting closer with each screen I passed. Finally, the corridor ended at a mirrored wall, and I watched as my reflection began to crack, not the mirror itself, but the version of me on the other side, its skin splitting at the seams, its mouth opening far too wide to scream, without making a sound, and then, behind it, the familiar maroon door appeared. The numbers, 616, stitched into the wood with wire. And my reflection stepped aside, gesturing for me to go through. I should have run, screamed, collapsed, but something compelled me forward. Some ancient gravity that pulled at my bones and whispered that none of this was new, that I had done this before, would do it again, would always do it again, because 616 wasn't just a room, it was a loop. A trap for souls who slipped through cracks in reality. A place that appeared when the veil between thought and place thinned just enough to catch the desperate, the curious, the unlucky. I walked through the door and found myself back in the original hotel room, the real one. Or so it seemed, but the furniture was rearranged. The mirror gone, and the closet now wide open, with stairs descending into endless shadow, and on the bed was a VHS tape labeled "Play Me" in smeared black ink, resting on a dusty portable player already humming with static. I pressed play with shaking hands, and the footage that emerged showed the same room, but filmed from the ceiling, like a surveillance cam. And I watched myself enter the room again and again, different days, different clothes, different expressions, but each time ending the same way, staring into the mirror, twitching violently, and vanishing into the closet. As the tape ended, the screen cut to black, and a single line of red text appeared across the bottom. "You never left room 616, and that's when the knock came at the door. 5 slow knocks, evenly spaced, like a heartbeat, and I knew without opening it, that whatever was on the other side had my face. Room 616 was never meant to be opened." The 5 knocks echoed through the room like gunshots underwater, slow, methodical, heavy with purpose, and I stood frozen, staring at the door as if by sheer will I could keep it shut, but the air had changed. Again, thickened, gone syrupy and suffocating. And with each passing second, the silence grew unbearable, as if the space around me was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I backed away until I hit the opposite wall, eyes locked on the door, which now pulsed faintly around the frame like it was alive, its edges bleeding shadow, and just as I thought the knocking might return, something worse happened to handle. Turned slowly, not violently, but with the slow confidence of someone who knew they had the right to enter. And as it creaked open an inch, a cold wind blew through the room, smelling of wet stone and burnt copper. And I heard a voice not from the hallway but from inside my own mind, layered with dozens of versions of myself, all speaking in different tones, all whispering the same phrase: "It's your turn now." I tried to scream, to move, to do anything, but my limbs betrayed me, stiff as iron, and the door opened fully to reveal me, or rather, a version of me identical in form, but subtly wrong, eyes too dark, smile too symmetrical, skin just slightly too pale. And when it stepped into the room, the lights flickered and the walls groaned like the entire building was reacting to its presence. It looked at me with something like pity, then something like hunger. And I heard it speak without moving its lips. "I carried the burden long enough. Now you have to wear it." And before I could react, it lunged forward, not to attack, but to embrace, and the moment its arms wrapped around me, I felt my consciousness fracture like glass dropped from a height, memories spiraling out of control. Real and unreal blurring together. I was checking in at the front desk again. I was crawling through the spiral corridor. I was standing. Checking in at the front desk again. I was crawling through the spiral corridor. I was standing in front of the mirror as it flickered violently. I was drowning in the glowing pool, surrounded by doors. I was being born in a hospital room, with 616 on the wall clock. I was dying in a hallway that had no end. And I was waking up, over and over. Always in the same room. Always at the same moment, myself opening the door. My reflection watching me. My other self waiting just behind the frame. When I came to, the room was quiet, sterile, perfectly ordinary, as if none of it had ever happened. but the clock on the wall read 6:16 a.m., and my phone buzzed to life beside the bed with a notification I didn't remember setting. Welcome back. Occupant 616. I stumbled to the bathroom and stared into the mirror, expecting to see something else. Something monstrous. But instead I saw nothing, no reflection at all, just a black screen. And then, slowly, painfully, a different face emerged. The version of me that had entered the room last night. Smiling calmly, mouthing the words "thank you," before fading completely. Leaving behind only my current hollow-eyed, shivering form. I turned and ran from the room, out into the hallway. But the layout had changed again, longer now. Lit only by dim red bulbs swinging gently from the ceiling, and at the far end, where the elevator should have been, there was only another door. Labeled 616, and I knew then that the room wasn't a place, it was a presence. A living concept that latched onto certain people at the right or wrong moment in time. Feeding on something deeper than fear, something like identity, memory, maybe. Even fate. I screamed until my throat tore, clawed at the walls. Tried to break the windows, which only showed blank white fog outside. And finally collapsed to the floor, only to hear footsteps approaching slowly from behind me. Measured and familiar, and when I turned I saw the concierge again. Eyes rolled back, face blank, holding out a clipboard and pen with a blank checkout form, and when I refused to take it he said in that flat, drained voice, "If you won't leave, someone else must take your place," and he gestured toward a flickering screen on the far wall, now displaying a live stream. My channel, my audience, the comments rolling in. Is this a promo? Is this real? Is this ARG, or are you okay? And with sudden horror I realized my mic had been live the entire time. Maybe longer than I had even existed in this place. And every moment of my unraveling had been broadcast, every scream and whisper dissected by strangers, and one comment stuck out in bright green. Booking room 616 now. Wish me luck. I tried to shut the screen off, to scream a warning, to stop it, but the concierge gently placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You've played your part. Now let someone else find their way in." Room 616 was never meant to be opened. I don't remember falling asleep, and I don't remember waking up. Only that I was suddenly back in the room again, sitting perfectly still on the edge of the bed, hands folded neatly in my lap, as if something had placed me there with purpose, and the room no longer looked strange or wrong but perfectly, oppressively normal, as if it had been scrubbed of all evidence of what I had seen, lived, or become. The mirror was clean now, reflecting only the exhausted shell of myself. The closet door was shut and locked with no sign it had ever opened. And even the flickering buzz in the walls had gone completely silent, replaced by an emptiness that felt more terrifying than the noises ever had. And when I stood, I noticed the air didn't resist me anymore, didn't press down like a hand on my back. It was calm, indifferent, finished. I opened the nightstand drawer out of reflex, and found a single slip of paper inside, folded once, no dust, no signs of age, and written in blocky, almost childlike handwriting, were the words, "Checkout is at 6:16, don't be late." And beneath that, smaller, barely legible, "They're watching who doesn't leave." I glanced at the clock, and saw that it was already 6:11 a.m. The red digits blinking steadily, and though I didn't understand why, something in me knew that whatever was meant to happen would be irreversible once the minute hand struck 6:16. I moved quickly, flinging open drawers. grabbing my scattered belongings that somehow had aged and withered overnight. My phone screen was cracked now, the charger frayed, my clothes stiff with mildew and dust, and as I moved toward the door, I noticed something that made my legs freeze mid-step. The room had no number. Where the 616 plaque had been bolted to the door the night before was now only deep gouges, as if someone had clawed the metal loose with bloody fingers, and etched just below those marks in what looked like rust or dried blood was a spiraling symbol, one I remembered from the circular hallway deep below the hotel. From the pool, from the monitors, the sign that marked you as belonging. I grabbed the handle and yanked the door open, expecting resistance, or some monstrous figure waiting on the other side. But there was nothing, just the hallway, freshly vacuumed. Music playing softly through hidden speakers, the wallpaper, flawless and cheerful like a high-end spa. I ran down the hall toward. Was nothing, just the hallway, freshly vacuumed? Music playing softly through hidden speakers, the wallpaper flawless and cheerful like a high-end spa. I ran down the hall toward the lobby, and found it glowing with warm morning light, the concierge. Now replaced by a friendly-looking woman, with a wide-brimmed hat and a bright pink blouse, who smiled at me and said, "Checking out today, hun?" As if nothing had ever happened, as if this had been a perfectly average stay. I nodded, barely able to form words, and as she clicked at the ancient keyboard on the counter, she asked, "Did you enjoy your stay in room 615? The number hit me like a truck, and I corrected her, my voice cracking. No, it was 616, but she shook her head gently and pointed to the guest registry. Already filled out in looping cursive that wasn't mine, listing my room as 615, the signature identical to mine but subtly wrong, like a copy made by someone who had only seen it once, and I looked around, trying to find any sign that the nightmare I'd endured had ever existed. But everything now radiated mundanity, reality, the front doors wide open to daylight, and the sound of birds, my car parked exactly where I'd left it. Desperate for something, anything, I asked, "Has anyone else checked into 616 recently?" And she blinked, then chuckled lightly as if I'd made a joke, and said, 616? There's no such room here, sir. We skip from 615 straight to 617, always. Have, and I must have stared at her too long because her smile faltered and she added, "Are you sure you're feeling okay?" And I realized then how it must look. Ragged, disoriented, dirty, like someone who'd gone mad overnight in a normal hotel. But I didn't answer, I just took the receipt she handed me, which bore no room number at all, and staggered out to my car with hands trembling so badly, I could barely turn the key in the ignition. As I pulled onto the road, glancing back through the rearview mirror, I saw the hotel already receding, disappearing behind trees, its roofline bending oddly as if it were folding in on itself, and I thought for a moment I saw my own face watching me from a second-floor window, staring blankly as if trapped behind the glass, but when I looked again, it was gone. I drove for hours, maybe days, not stopping, not answering calls, not trusting what was real anymore, and eventually found myself hundreds of miles away at a roadside diner, where I used a payphone to call my best friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, and tried to explain what had happened, but I couldn't find the words. Only fragments, and when he finally responded, all he said was, "That's insane. Hey, did you see this link someone posted in your name? It's called Room 616 footage. "Dude, it's blowing up," and my blood turned to ice. I asked him to send it, and when I opened the video on the diner's public terminal, my heart stopped. There I was, sitting in the room, talking directly into the camera, narrating calmly, methodically, even smiling, describing things I didn't remember saying, things I never would have said, and near the end of the video, just before it cut to black, I looked straight into the lens and whispered, "They're coming for whoever watches this. Welcome to the next shift." And then the screen glitched and looped over and over, my face warping with each repetition, and behind my reflection, behind every flicker, room 616 waited, hungry, open, eternal. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. I drove until I ran out of gas, until the highway became a blur of repeating signs, and the sky turned the color of damp concrete. And even then, I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, not at the road, but at myself, because something was wrong with my reflection. Something I couldn't quite place, but grew worse, with every passing mile. Like my eyes were getting darker, deeper, hollowing out from the inside while my face stayed calm, still, like it was wearing me instead of being me. And the gas station, where I finally stopped, didn't appear on any GPS, had no brand, no attendants. Just a single pump and a small building with flickering fluorescent lights and shelves of expired snacks, but I had no choice. I had to stop, I had to breathe, and when I walked inside I immediately noticed that the radio was playing a warped version of the lullaby I'd heard in the pool chamber, those same 3 notes, stretched out and reversed. And the man behind the counter didn't look up from his crossword as he said, "You checked out too early, didn't you?" Like he'd been waiting for me. Like this was the next step in the path that had already been written. I asked him what he meant, who he was. But he only grinned and slid a small manila envelope across the counter, the front marked in red ink. "Only open if you still remember your name." And when I hesitated, he added, "Most don't. They get out, but the room follows. It always finds them again. You're still lucky enough to know who you are. For now." And something in his voice, low and far away, like it was being broadcast through a tunnel, made my skin crawl. I opened the envelope, hands trembling, and inside was a single photo printed on thick aged paper. Low and far away, like it was being broadcast through a tunnel, made my skin crawl. I opened the envelope, hands trembling, and inside was a single photo printed on thick, aged paper, a blurry black and white image of the hotel, decades old, with a figure standing in the top right window, one hand pressed against the glass, and when I turned it over there were numbers scrawled on the back, 616, 616, 616, over and over, until the ink had bled through, and beneath it, one final line, "If you see your reflection blink, it's already too late." I looked up to ask what it meant, but the man was gone, the chair empty. No sound but the hum of the lights, and when I turned back toward the door, I caught sight of myself in the freezer glass beside the counter, and my reflection was smiling. Even though I wasn't. It tilted its head just slightly, and my blood froze. Because I remembered what the mirror me had done before stepping into the closet, before handing over the burden. And I realized I'd never escaped at all, only bought time, only postponed the loop's closing arc, and now the room was inside me. Or maybe I was inside it. I fled the station and drove again, further west, into places the road forgot, stopping at empty motels and refusing to look in any mirrors, covering them with towels, tearing out the ones I couldn't hide, because every time I caught even a glimpse of myself. I saw it, that flicker, that impossible second of lag between my movement and the image. That grin starting just before I smiled, and the fear that if I looked too long, it might not blink when I did. I tried deleting the video, reporting it, taking down the channel. But every time I wiped it, it returned, sometimes under new accounts. Sometimes as bootlegs, reaction videos, even a creepypasta forum where people were trying to summon the room. On purpose, daring each other to book sketchy hotels and ask for 616. And I knew then that it was spreading, feeding through screens and belief and obsession, and the more people watched, the more the room grew, the hungrier it became. One night, months later, I received an email with no subject, no sender, just a JPG file attached, and against every instinct I opened it, finding a blurry screenshot of me, present-day me, sleeping in a hotel bed I didn't recognize, and written in red across the bottom, "Check-in confirmed. Welcome back." I panicked, ran to the mirror, and saw nothing, not even a warped version of myself, just black. Like the glass had become a hole, or a window into somewhere else, and then, faintly, I heard a knock from inside it 5 times, slow and even, and my legs gave out beneath me because I knew, without question, it wasn't a dream, or a memory, or some trauma-induced hallucination. Room 616 wasn't a place you visited. It was a place that marked you, lived in you, grew through the cracks of your soul until you became a hallway for it to move through, and I had been its door, its carrier, its witness. I don't remember what happened after I collapsed, only waking up in another unfamiliar room, identical to the first, same maroon door, same humming walls, same soft knock, and when I looked down at my arm, I saw something new etched into my skin. Not carved, but growing beneath the surface, like a birthmark, slowly unfolding. The spiral symbol from the pool. The mark that meant belonging. And suddenly, I understood what the concierge meant when he said someone else had to take my place. Because I hadn't escaped. I'd only delayed. And now that the loop had brought me back to the beginning, I had one job left before it swallowed me whole. Find the next guest. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. I don't know how I got back to the hotel, or if I ever truly left, because the last thing I remember was standing in front of a roadside mirror, watching my reflection knock from the inside, and now here I was again, standing before the maroon door, with the crooked brass inside, and now here I was again, standing before the maroon door, with the crooked brass numbers, 616, nailed back into place, as though they'd never been removed. And when I looked down at the key in my hand, I noticed the tag was blank, no number, no engraving, just a smooth surface that pulsed faintly with warmth, like a heartbeat. And in that moment, I understood the truth. There was no map, no timeline, no escape, only a spiral that fed on belief, memory, and fear, and every time someone tried to unravel it, they became the next, not in its design. The hallway behind me stretched longer than before, lined with identical doors, each of them slightly ajar, each leaking whispers that weren't quite words, but suggestions. Echoes of past guests, who had once tried to resist, and now I could feel them watching me, not with malice, but with anticipation, because I had made it further than most. I hadn't died screaming, or vanished without a trace. I'd returned, and the room recognized its own. When I finally stepped inside, it was no longer a hotel room at all, but a hybrid of every version I'd seen: part childhood bedroom, part surveillance chamber, part water-lit temple, the air rich with mildew and electricity, the walls stitched together with memories I hadn't made yet, and seated on the bed, wearing my old hoodie, was someone new, a kid, no older than 16, wide-eyed, knees clutched to his chest, trembling as he looked at me like I was a ghost. And when I asked who he was, he just said, "They sent me a link," and held up a cracked phone showing my face mid-scream, mid-confession, from one of the stolen videos that wouldn't die. He'd watched the whole thing on a dare, clicked on a second video posted by an anonymous account named You Checked In, and then woke up here, in the room, alone until now. And it hit me, finally, with paralyzing clarity. The room didn't hunt, it didn't lure, it didn't even need to manipulate people, brought themselves. Always, because curiosity was the door, belief the key, and my story had become the bait. A virus disguised as horror fiction, and now I was here, not as a victim, but as a part of its immune system, meant to test the next host, to pass on the infection through story, through warning, through presence. I told him everything, the pool, the spiral, the mirror, the knock, the reflection that doesn't blink, and with every detail, the lights dimmed, just slightly, the hum behind the walls deepened, and the closet door behind us began to creak open. On its own, inch by inch, as though the room were listening, feeding, growing stronger with each retelling. The boy asked me how to leave, if there was a way out, and I almost lied. I almost told him yes. That if he resisted hard enough, or closed his eyes, or said a magic phrase, it would all go away. But then, I remembered the hundreds of reflections I'd seen on the monitors, the different versions of me, who'd tried different paths, and all ended the same, and instead, I told him the truth. You don't leave, you just delay, and his face twisted with fear and betrayal and the beginnings of understanding. The kind that only arrives when something irreversible begins to take root in the mind. The mirror across from the bed lit up again, flickering, showing him, not me, this time, but him lying on the bed in different postures, in different clothes, aging slowly across each frame. Like the room was testing how many ways it could keep him here, how many timelines it could feed into his future. I reached for the closet door, unsure what would happen, but needing to end the moment, before it swallowed both of us. And as I pulled it open fully, we both stared into the dark. No bottom, no shape, only sound, whispers, gasping breath, the wet drag of something pulling itself upward, toward the threshold, and then from behind us came the knock 5 times. Deliberate, final, and I didn't turn, because I already knew what I would see. The boy screamed, bolting toward the bathroom. And I followed, not to save him, but because the lights in the room had begun to strobe, casting shadows that didn't match our movements, and the door slammed shut behind us with a force that rattled the tiles. We waited in silence, only the soft gurgle of the sink filling the air. Until finally, I dared to speak. "It won't stop unless you do what I did," and before he could ask what that was, the lights went out, and the mirror across the sink came alive with a new scene. The front desk, pristine and glowing. The woman in pink, smiling and holding out a key card with his name on it, welcoming him, already forgetting me. And I knew then that the room had chosen, the spiral was closing. And my time was nearly up. The boy turned to me with horror as his reflection smiled wider and wider. Teeth multiplying, eyes dimming, and whispered, is that me?" And I nodded slowly, placing my hand on the glass, watching my own reflection dissolve into static, and said, "It is now." Room 616 was never meant to be opened. The bathroom light flickered back on with a sickly green hue, and the mirror went dark. No more reflections. No more ghost images or flickering timelines. Just black glass staring back at us like a sealed window to something buried behind time itself. And the kid, now pale and shaking, asked me again, in a voice that barely held itself together, "What happens next?" But the real question was written all over his face: "What happens to you?" Because we both understood now that only one of us could leave, only one could carry the memory forward, while the other became part of the room. Another layer in its architecture, another version, waiting behind glass, for the next visitor. I opened the bathroom door slowly, half expecting the hallway to be gone, or the room to be transformed again, but instead everything was quiet, eerily still, like the hotel was holding its breath except for one new detail. On the bed sat a guest feedback card, blank, pristine, and beneath it, resting perfectly centered on the comforter, was a new envelope, thicker than the last, sealed with wax, that bore the spiral mark I now knew too well. I approached it cautiously, and peeled it open, revealing two things: a single Polaroid of me, and the boy standing in front of the mirror, and a hand-scrawled note that read, "Thank you for your stay. Transmission successful. The room is now self-sustaining." And underneath that, written faintly, almost invisible, "You are now free to check out." But I didn't feel free. I felt hollow, unraveling, like a piece of thread being pulled endlessly through a needle that no longer led anywhere. And when I turned to the boy, he was already gripping the mirror with both hands, eyes vacant, mouth twitching like he was hearing something I couldn't, and he said, "I see it now. I see all of it. It's already here." And before I could stop him, he slammed his forehead into the glass, cracking it in a perfect spiral, the center caving inward with a soft sucking sound like air being pulled through a throat. And the moment the mirror shattered, the walls of the room rippled, literally. The plaster bending like fabric caught in a storm, and the hum returned. Louder now, deafening, like a turbine fed by memories and loops and faces and failures. And the bed burst into flames without heat, blue fire licking upward as the photo burned itself away, the spiral mark searing itself onto the ceiling above us, and the room began folding in on itself, like a collapsing lung. I grabbed the boy, pulled him from the mirror shards. But he was limp, muttering nonsense, his eyes flicking back and forth rapidly. And somewhere in the corner, near the closet door, I saw figures gathering, not shadows, not reflections, but people, dozens of them, all versions of myself at different ages, some missing eyes, some bound in chains of hair and wire, some standing peacefully with sad smiles like they'd made peace with something I hadn't yet understood, and they all whispered in unison, "You are the echo. Let the new voice rise." And with that, I felt it, not in my ears but in my bones, a release, a snap. Like the string that had kept me tethered to this place had finally broken. And I turned to the hallway where a door now stood wide open to the morning outside, clean, real, air, moving like it should, no flicker, no hum, and I knew this was my only chance to escape, not the room, but the roll, the loop. I looked at the boy one last time, still kneeling, still lost. The spiral faintly glowing beneath the skin of his throat now, and whispered, "You'll understand soon." We all do, then walked out, and as I crossed the threshold into the light, I heard the door shut behind me, Not with a slam, but with a soft, final click, like the end of a chapter, written in someone else's hand. The world outside hadn't changed, cars passed, birds sang. People stared at their phones and crossed streets, but I had. I could feel it in the way shadows leaned toward me, how mirrors still held a 2-second delay before catching up, how every time I saw the number 616, I felt a spike of pressure behind my eyes. And the knowledge that the room wasn't finished with me, it was simply growing beyond me now, living in the stories told, the videos watched, the dares whispered between friends who didn't know what they were invoking. I checked my inbox a week later to find an email from an address that didn't exist anymore. No reply at 616stay.com. And the subject line read simply, "Another guest has checked in. Thank you for your service." With an attached thumbnail of the boy, now sitting in the center of the room, smiling directly into the camera as the closet door behind him creaked open. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. The email vanished the second I clicked it, leaving no trace in my inbox, no cached thumbnail, no download history, not even the browser remembered it. And that terrified me more than the image itself, because it meant the room was evolving, learning how to erase its tracks. And as I stared at the empty screen with my heart pounding in my chest, I felt a sudden pressure at the base of my skull. Like something was pressing inward from the inside. A dull ache that pulsed every few seconds in perfect sync with my heartbeat. And in that moment I knew the room had left a part of itself behind. A fingerprint inside my mind. Maybe even a keyhole. And all it needed now was for someone else to turn it. I tried returning to normal life, if you can call what I had before this normal. But every attempt failed in small, rotting increments. Friends stopped replying to texts. Numbers on my phone disappeared and reappeared in different orders. Street signs misspelled familiar names. And even my own reflection began to disobey more frequently. Blinking out of sync or holding a fixed stare after I'd turned away mocking me. Maybe, or warning me, I couldn't tell anymore. A month later, I received a box at my door, unmarked, sealed with that familiar wax spiral. And I knew immediately that opening it would be a mistake, but of course I did. Because no one escapes curiosity, not really, and inside was a hotel key. On a silver chain with a tag that read, "For emergencies only," and on the back, "You'll know when." Beneath it was a flash drive and a crumpled napkin from a gas station halfway across the country. The kind I hadn't seen since before all this began, and scrawled across it in blue pen. "He made it to the mirror. He's asking for you by name." And suddenly I saw his face again. The boy, sitting on that bed. Whispering truths the room was feeding him. Becoming its voice, its mouthpiece. And I realized I hadn't escaped, I'd just been drafted into a new tier of responsibility. I plugged in the flash drive in a coffee shop, surrounded by oblivious strangers. And a single video opened without a file name, without a play button. Just a live feed that began automatically, the interior of room 616. Angles I'd never seen before, a perfect 360-degree view, and sitting in the center was not the boy but me. Not how I looked now, but how I looked the night I first arrived. Bag on the floor. Sweat on my brow, the moment before the mirror began to flicker. And as I watched, horrified, that version of me turned to look directly at the camera, raised a hand slowly, and said, "He's here again. We need another guest," and the feed glitched, cut, looped back 5 seconds, and played it again, and again, and again, like a broken record buried in haunted circuitry. When I yanked the drive free, the laptop screen cracked down the center with a shriek of static. The lights in the cafe blinked, and a barista spilled boiling coffee on herself but didn't scream. Didn't react at all, just stood there staring at the wall like she'd forgotten how time worked, and I ran no destination, just motion. Just an instinct to get away before the room fully woke up inside me again. And that night I slept in my car at a rest stop, clutching the emergency key. Like it might explode. That's when the dreams returned, not the usual kind, but layered dreams. Dreams within dreams where I would wake up only to find I was still in 616. Brushing my teeth, buttoning a shirt I didn't own, hearing the knock from somewhere below. Or worse, the voice of the concierge, whispering directly into my eardrum, "Someone's checked in using your name." And then, during one of those dreams, I found myself in a different version of the hotel, not decaying, not monstrous, but modern, sleek, new construction, and yet still carrying the exact same energy, like an organ transplant where the heart of the building remained the same, no matter how the exterior changed. And on the 6th floor, was room 616, again, untouched, waiting, door cracked, mirror glowing. And inside was a conference table, surrounded by people, all with my face, all wearing different clothes, some in suits, some in pajamas, one soaked in pool water, and shivering, and they turned to me in unison and said, "The guest arrives tomorrow. You'll greet them this time." And I woke up screaming in a Walmart parking lot with my mouth full of rust and the emergency key missing from my neck. I returned home to find it already there, placed neatly on my desk, beside a new envelope that said only, "Welcome, concierge in training. You've been expected." And inside was a printed script, a list of phrases I hadn't said yet, meant for a future guest. Including lines like, "No one ever really checks out, and the mirror always tells the truth," on the third blink, and at the bottom, beneath all the notes and timings, was a final instruction. "When the door knocks 5 times, smile. It's showtime." And as I stared down at it, something inside me, whatever was still human, began to cry, because I realized the room hadn't just fed on my fear or harvested my memories. It had turned me into part of its machinery. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. I tried burning the script, tearing it apart, flushing the pieces down the toilet. But no matter what I did, every morning it reappeared in the exact same place, perfectly folded, the ink never smudged. Always smelling faintly of mildew, and that electric ozone stench I'd only ever smelled inside the room, and every time I read it, even by accident, I found new lines written in my own handwriting, things I couldn't remember writing. Things like, "We are the door now, and do not forget to smile when they say." I thought this was just a joke, and worse. Entire paragraphs describing guests I hadn't met yet, including their names, their fears, their reasons for booking the room, and the precise time they'd knock on the mirror. As if the room was bleeding its future into me drop by drop, until I was just another vessel, another tour guide in its eternal spiral of suffering. I stopped sleeping completely after a while, not because I didn't want to, but because every time I closed my eyes, I'd wake up somewhere in the hotel. Sometimes in the laundry room, where the sheets screamed as they spun. Sometimes in the elevator shaft, where the numbers never stopped cycling between 6 and 1 and 6 again. And sometimes in the pool, where the water rose slowly, always just above my nose. Always whispering secrets in the voice of the boy who had replaced me, and each time I woke in my real bed, drenched in sweat, only to find a new photo taped to my bathroom mirror, always black and white, always grainy, always showing someone else now trapped inside the room, staring at the camera with that same hollow look I once wore. And I knew what the room wanted. It wanted me to return, not as a prisoner this time, but as the host. I resisted for as long as I could, ignoring the voices in the vents, the phone calls with no caller ID, that only played the sound of distant footsteps, followed by 5 knocks. The reflection in my microwave that smirked even when I didn't, but resistance only made it hungrier, more aggressive, until one night I opened my fridge and found it empty except for a steaming hotel meal with a silver lid and a note that said room service on the house, and when I lifted the lid, it was a plate of my own teeth, arranged in a spiral, each one engraved with a guest's name I somehow recognized. I finally broke down and drove back to the hotel's location, or where it used to be, but when I got there, the lot was gone, overgrown with weeds, the building no longer standing, only a collapsed foundation and an old cement pillar where a single key dangled from a hook, and when I picked it up, I realized I hadn't come to find the room. I'd come because it called me home. The key pulsed in my palm like a living thing, and the second I touched it, the world shifted, not violently, not with thunder or fire, but subtly, like someone had changed the channel and no one noticed, and suddenly, I was standing in the hallway again, right outside room 616. And this time, the door was already open, just a crack. Just enough to let the cold breath of the room whisper out and stroke my skin like a parent beckoning a child to bed. Inside, everything was waiting. The mirror, now whole again but webbed with gold like cracked porcelain, repaired with care, the bed freshly made, the closet door shut tight, and on the nightstand, the spiral script, my guest list, and a new photo. This time of a young woman I'd never seen before, wearing headphones, sitting at a computer, mid-laugh as if she was watching something funny, and on her screen, blurry but unmistakable, was footage of the room's door slowly creaking open. I didn't know her name, not yet, but I knew she'd be next, and just like that, the floor beneath my feet glowed with the same soft blue light from the pool. And the room began humming, like it was waking from a nap, stretching its limbs, and I realized it wasn't just a place, it was an intelligence, an organism built from repetition, made real by attention and fear and ritual. And every story told about it only fed its shape, made it sharper, more persistent, more true. I stepped toward the mirror and saw not myself, but an empty chair, waiting. And then the camera turned, not digitally, but as if something was moving it, and I understood my role now. Fully, I was the usher, the narrator, the voice in the dark leading the new guest to their seat. And the story would continue through me. Not because I wanted it to, but because the room had already written the ending, and now it needed the next chapter. Behind me, the knock came 5 times, and I turned, slowly, smiling as I'd been trained to do, and whispered, "Welcome. You must be tired. Don't worry, you've already checked in." Room 616 was never meant to be opened. She stepped into the room without hesitation. Like something had pulled her across time and reason to this exact point. And as soon as she crossed the threshold, the door swung shut behind her, not with a slam, but with a sigh, like the room exhaling with satisfaction after holding its breath for too long, and in that instant the temperature dropped, the lights dimmed to that familiar shade of rotten green, and the spiral on the ceiling blinked once, just once, as if confirming, the cycle begins again. She looked around, confused. but not afraid yet, her eyes scanning the room with that same first timer uncertainty I once had, touching the wallpaper like it might flake off in her hands, sniffing the air and wrinkling her nose at the staleness that always smelled like old coins and wet carpet. And I stayed still in the corner, mostly out of view, just observing, just listening as the room began to test her, easing her in first with a flicker in the mirror. Just a brief flash of something moving behind her that made her turn too quickly, then with the static from the old TV clicking on by itself, showing a grainy black and white video of her childhood bedroom, looping on a silent feed while the sound played something else entirely, a voicemail from her father, who had died 2 years ago. Except this time, he was whispering her name in reverse. She backed away from the screen, unsettled, but trying to rationalize. And then the phone rang, the room phone, which had never worked for me, but now screamed into life with such force that even I, seasoned as I was, felt my skin crawl, and she picked it up, hesitated, whispered hello. And the voice that replied was her own, older, rasping, distorted, saying, "Why did you come back?" Followed by a sharp click, and the dial tone became a heartbeat that matched her own, faster and faster, syncopated with the flickering of the lights and the throb beneath the floorboards. The room was testing her limits now, learning her emotional boundaries, seeing where her walls were weakest, and it didn't take long for the mirror to begin its performance, the slow warping, the first signs of reflection delay. Then, the small distortions, her reflection blinking twice when she hadn't blinked at all, her mouth smiling just a split second after the real one had gone still, and then, finally, the face behind her appeared, that same grayscale figure I'd seen once in my dreams, long-limbed, faceless, wearing a bellhop's hat too large for its head, holding out a key that dripped ink instead of blood. And as her knees gave out and she stumbled to the bed, the mattress groaned like something alive had shifted beneath it, like something remembered her weight from a lifetime ago and was adjusting to her return. She didn't scream, not yet, just sat there, shaking, clutching the blanket like it might shield her from the growing hum in the walls. And that's when the spiral began to move slowly, imperceptibly at first, just a gentle spin that made your eyes feel heavy, like gravity had shifted slightly, pulling your thoughts inward, spiraling into the ceiling with it. And then she spoke. Soft, stunned. "I've dreamed this place. I've dreamed this room since I was a child." And I knew then, she wasn't just another guest, she was called, maybe even born for this role. And the room had waited decades for her to arrive, keeping her memory buried in the pipes, the plaster, the peeling paint. And now it was waking all of that up, feeding her fragments she didn't know she'd lost. The closet creaked open then, just enough to show a sliver of darkness. And something inside it giggled a child's laugh, twisted, high-pitched, layered with static, and her eyes widened in recognition, whispering no, not again, and the mirror flashed, showing not her, but 3 versions of her, all children, all running in slow motion through a long hallway made of hands, and the TV turned off as if it had seen enough. She reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook, shaking fingers flipping through its pages. Dozens of sketches, spirals, doorways. The number 616, scrawled over and over and over again. Like she'd been preparing for this visit her whole life, without knowing it. And as she began to cry, not out of fear, but out of remembrance, I felt it, something I hadn't felt since my first night. The room was excited. Genuinely excited. the walls vibrating with anticipation, like a stage before a performance, and I understood why this wasn't just a guest, she was a returning character. Someone who had been here before in another loop, another body, another lifetime. And now the story had a chance to reach further, to go deeper, and maybe even end. The spiral on the ceiling stopped spinning suddenly, freezing mid-rotation, and the lights snapped off. Total darkness. Not just the absence of light, but the presence of something that swallowed light whole, and in that infinite black, I heard her voice again, calm now, certain, saying, I remember who I was. I remember what I left behind. I came back to finish it, and I smiled, tears running down my face. Because the room had finally done it, it had found the one who remembered everything. And I knew in that moment, the story was nearing its final act, the loop was tightening. And when this one ended, it would not begin again. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. The lights didn't come back on the way they usually did, not with that flickering hum or soft, static breath, but instead, with a sound like something ancient, exhaling through stone, a groan from the foundation of the world itself. And when the darkness peeled away, it wasn't into the usual dim hotel glow, but into something red, pulsing, almost organic, as if the walls had turned into muscle, and the ceiling into a living lid, trying to shut again. And in that saturated bloodlight she was still sitting on the bed, only now she looked different, older and younger at once, her hair wild, eyes rimmed in black veins that pulsed in rhythm with the light. And the room had shaped itself around her, as if it finally recognized its long-lost conductor had returned, and in that moment, I stopped being the host, the usher, the witness. I was just another object, just another piece of furniture to this ritual it had waited so long to resume. She stood up slowly, the mattress releasing her, like it was made of breath. And with each step she took, toward the mirror, the room shifted subtly. The spiral above her unraveled and reformed again and again in liquid motion. The floor tiles beneath her feet aged and renewed themselves in seconds. And the mirror's surface rippled like warm water, reflecting not her body, but her essence, hundreds of her, thousands, all at once, layered like old film negatives, each trapped in their own 616. Crying, screaming, laughing, dancing. And in the center of it all, the child version of her, holding hands with something tall and eyeless that whispered in her ear, nodding slowly as if encouraging her to finally open the door. She turned to me then, eyes locked on mine with a kind of sympathy I hadn't earned, and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I tried to answer, but my voice was gone, as if the room had stolen it to give to her. And she smiled gently before placing her palm flat on the mirror surface, and as her skin touched the glass, it spoke not audibly, but through feeling, vibration, memory, and truth. And I suddenly saw it all. This room wasn't built, it was discovered, unearthed beneath something far older than the hotel, buried in stone that predates language. A kind of wound in reality itself that someone had foolishly constructed around and labeled with numbers and walls and carpet. But those things were just decoration, just scaffolding to contain the event that room 616 always was and always would be. She began to recite words I didn't recognize but somehow understood. Not in language but in meaning, and with each syllable the room trembled, not in fear but in joy. And the mirror bulged outward like it was going to give birth to something long trapped behind it. And then it cracked, not shattered, but split clean. down the center like a door, revealing not the boy this time, not the pool, or the hallway, or the elevator shaft, but a spiraling stairwell made of bone and mist that went up, endlessly up, and a sound came from it. A song built from the voices of everyone who had ever entered the room, layered over each other, forming chords no human mouth could ever sing. And the woman stepped toward it and whispered, "This time, I finish it," and turned back to me. Her face, now covered in thin golden lines, cracks filled with light. Like her skin couldn't contain the soul inside anymore, and she said, "Your story ends when I reach the top. Hold the door. Don't let it close. Not this time." And then she stepped through the mirror, her foot vanishing into mist, her body folding inward like a flame reversing itself. And I was left alone in the room again, but not like before. Not just abandoned, because now the door was open behind the mirror. Truly open, and the room panicked. It flickered, the spirals spasmed, the walls twisted back into angles that didn't exist. And I realized the room wasn't a predator, it was a prison, and she had just broken out. Alarms in no human language echoed through the floor, and I stumbled to the mirror door, holding it open with my bare hands as it tried to seal shut with wet, sucking resistance. And behind it, I saw her silhouette ascending the spiral staircase, her body stretching and reforming as she rose. More light pouring out of the cracks in her than the room could handle, and I felt it in my bones, in my teeth, in the place behind my eyes. When she reached the top, everything would change, and the room knew it too, because it began to collapse. Not physically but symbolically. Pages of the guestbook turned to ash, the carpet peeled back into fire, the ceiling spiral unraveled, and bled symbols into the air that screamed like voices being erased and still. I held the mirror open with arms that had long since stopped being my own, infused now with something older, something watching. And I realized this was my true purpose all along, not to trap others, not to guide them into doom, but to witness the ending. To hold the door open just long enough for one of us to make it out and take the story with them. And from deep inside the spiral staircase came one final sound, her voice, calling my name, not the one I used now, but the one I had before the room rewrote me. And in that moment I remembered who I was before all this began, before the first night, before the first knock, before room 616 ever whispered my name. And I cried, not from fear, not from grief but from release, because she was almost there, almost to the top, and when she reached it, the door behind the mirror would open from the outside. Room 616 was never meant to be opened, the spiral staircase behind the mirror stretched on forever. But I could feel her nearing the top, not in sight, not in sound, but in pressure. Like gravity reversing in increments with each step she took, shifting the weight of reality itself downward into the room. And as I stood there holding the mirror door open, every fiber of my being screamed with effort, not just muscles but memory, identity. Will all stretched thin by the closing force of the threshold, as though the room itself had become desperate to shut it, to trap her inside again before she completed what she was always meant to do. The walls had given up on illusion, now they no longer bothered to pretend to be wallpaper or wood or old hotel decor, instead they pulsed with layers of thought, faces pressing from the other side of the surface like the room had filled with everyone it had ever consumed, all trying to scream warnings or prayers through a skin of shadow. And somewhere inside that human chorus I saw myself. Or the old version of me, the man who had first opened this door. mouth gaping wide in silent horror as the spiral consumed his reflection, and now I was holding that door open, arms locked and bloodless, bones creaking like the very wood of the building itself, and still she climbed up and up, her silhouette glowing brighter with each revolution of the bone staircase, pieces of her body breaking off into light that rose faster than she did, and painted the air above her like falling stars in reverse. The room didn't just tremble now, it screamed, and the spiral on the ceiling turned black, spinning in reverse until it bent into a perfect circle and exploded silently, sending a ripple through the room that shattered the fake geometry of the hotel, revealing beneath it the true form, a spherical cathedral of thought and decay, suspended in a void of unraveling language, where words were scaffolding and time was meat. And I saw through its bones through every instance of room 616 across space and story and person, stacked on top of each other like mirrors facing mirrors, each with its own guests, its own horrors, its own endings, except none of them had reached this point before. None had ever broken past the penultimate step. And now she was doing it. And the room knew it. And the room hated it. A dozen doors opened along the walls, figures spilling out of them, distorted guests and forgotten hosts, each dragging chains of memory behind them, trying to reach the mirror, to pull it shut with shriveled hands and mouths stitched from denial. But I screamed back, summoned everything I had ever been before this moment, and pushed, the mirror glowing now with heat that burned away my name, my past, my skin, until only a shell remained, a vessel of resistance holding open the only exit that ever mattered. And then, from the top of the spiral stairwell, light detonated, not an explosion, not even a flash, but a reversal of shadow, a purging of false space. And the scream of the room reached such a frequency that the air itself shattered into pieces of time, little loops of repeating seconds falling like ash all around me. And suddenly she was there, stepping back through the mirror, not climbing down, not descending like a human, but unfolding from the light into the room. Not as herself anymore, but as something whole. Her eyes twin galaxies, her voice a chorus of every guest who'd ever died trying. And she looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, and said, "It's open. But it won't stay that way unless someone closes it from this side." And I understood instantly what she meant, what it demanded, what it cost. And she stepped aside from the mirror door, holding it open with a single hand, her form now perfectly still while the chaos of the room spun and tore around us like a dying storm. And I turned to look, just once, behind the mirror, and saw the stairway gone. The spiral uncoiled into a bridge of starlight, and beyond it, something new. Something not there but possible. A space where the room didn't exist. Where it couldn't, and I felt its pull, the clean, terrifying emptiness of freedom. And I looked back at her, and she nodded once, solemnly, not commanding me but honoring my choice. And I stepped toward the threshold but not through it, and took her place, pressed my hands against the sides of the mirror and became the seal, bones locking into the glass, fingers sinking into the frame. And as I did, she smiled one last time, whispered, "Thank you," and stepped through into the place beyond the room. Instantly, the mirror sealed with a sound like a closing eye. The light vanished, and the room, what was left of it, collapsed into stillness. No longer humming, no longer alive, just a silent, ordinary hotel room with peeling wallpaper, a dusty bed, and a locked door labeled 616. And now I wait, not as a prisoner but as a guardian, fused into the frame, eyes watching the walls from within. And I know the last guest has gone free, the last story has found its ending, and now there is only one thing left to do, to hold it shut long enough for the world to forget this room ever existed. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. The silence that followed her departure was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't quiet the way a room empties after someone leaves or a conversation dies. It was a hollowing, a subtraction of pressure. As if the space once occupied by the room's hunger had been evacuated, leaving only the faint echo of its former pulse buried deep beneath the still air. I stood there, or what was left of me did, no longer in a body, not quite thought, but a presence fused into the frame of the mirror, embedded between reflection and memory, and for the first time since I'd ever heard the name Room 616, I felt peace, not freedom, not joy, but peace, the kind that comes at the end of a storm when all that remains is debris and sky. The room didn't breathe anymore, didn't sing, or flicker, or gnash at the walls. It simply existed, a dormant chamber, without audience or ritual. And in that dormancy I knew I had succeeded, that she had succeeded, and that the bridge beyond, the spiral staircase, was closed now, sealed on the far end, by someone who had taken the truth of the room and carried it beyond the reach of its gravity, to a place where its name had no meaning and its whispers could not follow. But even in that peace, I knew my vigil was not yet complete. Time passed differently here, or not at all. And I do not know how long I lingered within the mere years, hours, seconds folded like origami into each other, but eventually, as all stories that try to end too cleanly often do, something came back. It started small, as always, a scratch at the edge of the doorframe, a soft buzzing from the wall outlet. A single knock, just one, but it reverberated through the room like the echo of a buried heartbeat, and with it came a ripple in the mirror glass. Not enough to break through, but enough to tremble. And I saw it then, not her, not a guest, but a child, no older than 6, standing just beyond the veil of reflection, not knocking, not speaking, but watching, as if she could sense the shape of the thing beneath the glass, without understanding it. And in her eyes I saw it again, the flicker of curiosity that had doomed so many before her, and behind her stood a tall figure in shadow, hand on her shoulder, not guiding her forward, but allowing it. And that was when I realized what I had missed. The room was never a single place, never just a number or a door. It was a seed, planted in the minds of those who heard its story, and every telling, every whisper, every script, every upload and replay and adaptation had scattered that seed farther and wider, until it no longer needed walls or locks or even this mirror. It only needed belief, and the story would reassemble itself anywhere it was remembered. I wanted to scream, to warn her, to shake the glass and shout that she must turn away, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but watch as she reached out her hand toward the surface of the mirror from the other side. The side I once called the real world, and as her fingers brushed the glass, it didn't ripple, it welcomed her, the surface parting like breath, like it had been waiting for this one specific heartbeat all along, and the child stepped through. Not afraid, not confused, but calm, as if answering a call she'd always known was meant for her. And the figure behind her followed, its face still hidden, but its shape achingly familiar, tall, narrow, limping ever so slightly. And with that I remembered the man from the hallway all those years ago, the one who tried to warn me, The one with no eyes, no voice, who vanished the moment I tried to help. He had never left. He had been watching too, waiting for the next door to open, and now he had found his way back through the child. As they entered, the mirror resealed behind them without a sound, and the room sighed, not in hunger, but in contentment, like a long-awaited cycle had finally resumed. And the spiral returned to the ceiling once more, faint, subtle, turning not in violence, but in rhythm, like the heartbeat of a story too old and too strong to die. I was still there, still watching, still fused to the frame, but now I understood my role had changed. Not the guardian of a closed door, but the chronicler of its next chapter, the witness to its rebirth. And even though I knew the story had ended, I also knew now what no one else had dared to admit. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. But it also was never meant to be forgotten. Room 616 was never meant to be opened. The girl walked further into the room without hesitation. The quiet rhythm of her footsteps perfectly matched to the pulse that had begun humming through the walls again. The spiral on the ceiling glowing faintly, as if recognizing her presence, not in malice, but in fulfillment. Like something long dormant was now finally remembering what it was meant to do, and I, still buried in the frame of the mirror, felt it all with absolute clarity. She wasn't a victim, not a chosen one, not even a mistake, but a continuation. A seed of the room, planted in flesh. A part of its memory that had found a new vessel to carry the cycle forward. And the tall figure behind her, the man with no eyes, the one who had once tried to warn me, stood by the doorway now, with his head bowed. Not intervening, not guiding, just present. Like a monument to the hundreds who came before and failed. And I realized he was not just another guest but the first witness, the original story. The one who had lived through the room before anyone had the words to describe it. And perhaps he too had tried to stop it. Once, had tried to seal it, bury it, erase it, but the room had outlasted even him. And now here we were, the final chapter unfolding like a loop closing. No beginning or end, just a circle spiraling inward. And the girl, small, barefoot, wide-eyed, sat on the edge of the bed without fear, her fingers tracing the old carvings in the wall, as if she'd written them in another life. And suddenly the room responded, not violently, not with its usual flair for the grotesque, but gently. With a low groan, like a machine powering down, a surrender, an offering, and from the center of the floor, something rose. Not a hatch, not a hole, but a table, smooth and black, shaped like a mirror laid flat, and on it appeared a single object, a key, ancient and obsidian, pulsing Phi placed his hand on the glass, and for the first time I saw him fully. His face was mine. Or had been, long ago, before the room had remade me. A version of me from the start of all this. The one who had opened the door the very first time, before the numbers 616 ever meant anything, and he nodded at me, a silent gesture of gratitude, of closure, and then faded into the wall. Finally allowed to rest, and I knew then what it meant. The story was done, the cycle broken, not because the room had been destroyed, but because it had been completed. No more guests would arrive, no more screams would echo, no more whispers would crawl across the floor at 3:33 in the morning, because the story had reached its final word, its last breath, its quiet, aching period, and now I feel myself fading. 2. The glass no longer cold, the mirror no longer a prison, but simply a reflection again. And I smile, not because I won, Not because I escaped, but because I endured, and I saw the end. The spiral has stopped turning, the lights are off, the door is sealed. And room 616 is silent once more, and that silence is everything. Did you catch it? The loop. The moment the story folded in on itself and became you listening to it. What? If room 616 isn't just a room but a pattern, infecting minds like a virus passed through whispers and tales, could that knock you heard last night have been nothing? Or was it the story trying to write you next? Here on EchoVerse Whispers, we don't just tell horror. We unravel it, tear it open, let it bleed into your reality. And this campaign room, 616, isn't just fiction. It's warning. So ask yourself, why did you stay through all 15 parts? What part of you was the room already speaking to? And now that the door is closed, why does it still feel open? Thanks for listening. Subscribe if you dare. We're just getting started. This is EchoVerse Whispers. Whispers where stories don't end. They wait. Let me know if you want a version optimized for YouTube narration, a teaser trailer script, or visual title treatments.